Yes.
Hi Krishna, and welcome to another Wednesday's class at our ISV. And let's start. These are usually Gita classes. Our core focus on a Wednesday class is the Bhagavad Gita. But I have been doing a few of Srila Prabhupada's smaller books. And today we have selected another one of his Prabhupada's little gems to cover in the class. And it does cover the Bhagavad Gita in a much simpler and more concise form. So let's first start, as always, by our Mangalacharan prayers. Mangalacharan prayers will be, I'll read it from the Gita this time, because we have to find the real one. So here we go. Om Ajnanatimrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Tapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehaham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kantha Radha Kantha Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I offer my most humble obeisances to my Guru Maharaj, His Grace Vaisheshika Kari, and to my Shiksha Guru, His Grace Srivas Pandit Prabhu, both of whom have been my guiding light and my inspiration for taking the effort to do these classes. Without their guidance and knowledge, I would not be here today. I thank all the Vaishnavas who have assembled to hear this and beg forgiveness for any offenses or any mistakes that I may commit. If there's anything good in what I am presenting today, it is done by the grace of my Guru Maharajas, my Guru Maharaj and my Shiksha Gurus. And if there is anything wrong, then it's certainly my own fault. We will start, but before that, we have a small song that we always sing. It's a kind of invocation in itself, the Jai Radha Madhav song, and we will do that first. Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Vihari Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Vihari Jayo Gopi Jana Vallabha Jayo Girivaradhari Jayo Girivaradhari Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Vihari Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravana Chari Yamuna Tiravana Chari Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Vihari. Jayo Radha Madhava, Jayo Kunja Vihari, Jayo Gopijana Vallabha, Jayo Girivaradhari, Jayo Girivaradhari, Jayo Radha Madhava, Jayo Kunja Vihari, Jayo Radha Madhava, Jayo Kunja Vihari. My Guru Maharaj always reminds us that even medicine does not have an effect if we do not invoke the Lord for His grace. So when it comes to reading scriptural books or spiritual information, it's so important to take the blessings of the Lord, of the Acharyas, Vaishnavas, before we start. So today we will be doing...
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Yes,
Your
Master.
voice is very low. Are you
Yeah,
very
I
smart?
noticed. Hold on. I noticed that happens every time after the Radha Madhav. I think it has something to do with the sound of the kartals.
Okay. Okay.
Is it
Thank
better
you.
now?
It's better now. Thank you.
Yeah, I wait a minute or two and then it gets better. Used to be the bane of my recordings. Okay. So as I was saying, I've been doing Srila Prabhupada's Little Gems for a few classes now. We did Beyond Birth and Death, and I think we did one more. Today, I've picked up a very unusual book for all of us, and that is The Light of the Bhagavata. And this is a very unique book. And let me share the screen. I have a PPT for you that I want to share. I'm very excited to share that with you. Can you see, Mataji?
Yes, Mataji, we can see.
Perfect. So this is a review of the book, The Light of the Bhagavata. And I am just in love with this book. I don't understand why, in all my years of Krishna consciousness, I never got around to reading this book. And I am so grateful I picked it up to cover it today, because it's just been so amazing reading through Srila Prabhupada's writings. This book was written not as a book. It was written basically for a convention. It's called the Congress for Cultivating the Human Spirit. It was happening in Japan in the year 1961. At that time, Srila Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, Radha Damodar temple, and he got an invitation to attend this. And this was one of the first big events that he was getting a chance to go visit, but this was in Japan. So he had to make a lot of arrangements to travel there, and he wasn't sure if it will all come together. But you know Srila Prabhupada, none of his efforts are ever half-hearted. He's always got he's got himself in the game long before the whistle starts. And he's right there, and he's sitting there, can you imagine, in Radha Damodar temple, getting ready for this. And he envisions in his mind this idea of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. He wants to use that. And in that, there is a description of the autumn season. And he remembers that the Japanese, the Asians, they like nature a lot. They tend to appreciate the beauty of nature a lot. So he felt that, why don't I use that part of the Srimad Bhagavatam as an introduction to our spiritual culture? And he wanted to use that as a wedge, as Vaisheshika Maharaj always reminds us. He uses it as a wedge to get an entry point into their conversation. So he's picked up the 10th canto. He's picked up, I think, chapter 20, where there's a beautiful description of Vrindavan in autumn. And he writes this eloquent description from that. And in it, he adds in his own explanations. Well, it's not his own. He's adding in explanations that give the reader a clear and precise understanding what Krishna consciousness is all about. It's really amazing to watch. Let me move forward. So let me read this. It's there in the BBT website, the background of this book. And I thought it's awesome to bring it here and read through. In 1961, Srila Prabhupada was invited to make a presentation at Japan's Congress for Cultivating the Human Spirit. He expected that such an audience would appreciate descriptions of nature and considered autumn particularly auspicious. So he chose for his subject the 20th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam's 10th canto, which describes the autumn season Vrindavan, the place of Lord Krishna's appearance on earth. For his presentation, he envisioned an illustrated book juxtapositioning Bhagavatam verses with authentic Asian art to be prominently displayed at the conference. However, Srila Prabhupada wasn't able to attend, and the project was shelved. Then, 7 years after his passing, posthumously, in 1984, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust discovered the manuscript and commissioned artist Madame Li Yunsheng to create the accompanying artwork for the book Srila Prabhupada had intended to call Light of the Bhagavata. So this is a manuscript that never saw the light of day because it was meant for a particular purpose. And the moment he did not get, I'm not quite sure why he was not able to make it to Japan, whether it was visa issues, funding issues. Knowing his situation must have been all of them, because it's really difficult for him at that time. Remember, he was already a sannyasi. He was in Radha Damodar, very simple aesthetic life. Might have been difficult for him to procure the required funding and support to get there. But look at her. I really like this. Oh, hold on. Let me get back. He expected that such an audience would appreciate the description, and what his idea was, he wanted an illustrated book juxtapositioning these verses with authentic art. And then he wanted to display it at the conference. So if you go to these if you go into art galleries, they will have one artist that's prominently being displayed that month. And there'll be a specific section of the wall, or maybe like panels, that hold only the artist's work. And with each artwork, as they do in a regular art gallery, they will have this little explanation of each work and what it's about. And Prabhupada was thinking of something like that, creating an illustrated gallery of work that can be displayed that will immediately catch the attention of the viewing audience. He always thinks big. Prabhupada never thinks small. So there he is. We're not even sure he's getting funding if he's going to make it there. And he's already got this huge, elaborate vision of how he wants to present this. And he goes out of his way to create a book. It's not just a note. It's just not just 2-3 pages of an essay or something that he's going to read out. No, he's ready with a book. Prabhupada and Japan have a long backstory. Remember Nippon Publishing, who helped him with the Krishna book? He was very much into getting that printed, and he was able to get the money and get it printed. That came from Japan. Tokyo, we have the first ISKCON temple put in Tokyo. And I was reading from Prabhupada's notes. I should have kept the reference here. I was reading one of those books, and in that there was a room conversation with Sudama Das, where Sudama Prabhu talks about how Srila Prabhupada was very upset about the way Guru Puja was performed for him when he came. And then after scolding everybody, he comes back the next day to teach them how to do, I think it was Vyas Puja. He teaches them how to do the Vyas Puja. Prabhupada his momentum was so accelerated. There were temples opening everywhere, and there were devotees going out there to start these centers, and they were not very well trained or anything. Their only qualification was their deep and everlasting faith in their Guru Maharaj. And that is why these temples, even today, are amazing. They've grown, and they're amazing examples of dedication. The ISKCON temple in Tokyo is a very beautiful temple. Has the most amazing deities, Sri Radha Govind deities. Here's a picture of them. They also have Jagannath, Baldev, Subhadra, and I think they also have Krishna Balaram, if I'm not wrong. So you can take a look at that. There's on ISKCON on our thing. We'll check next one. ISKCON News. On ISKCON News, there is this link for the temple in Tokyo. So if you want to take a look, it's a beautiful temple. Reminds me of the Seattle temple. And this is the result of Srila Prabhupada's vision. He wanted in 1961 to make headway into Japan. But it did happen. wasn't then, but one of his disciples did do it for him. And there is proof there. Japan has beautiful temples, and Maharajas travel there every year. It is amazing to see his vision come and into fruition and come into being. His unfinished work, his manuscript, was finally published in 1984. And to make it according to his wishes, the BBT brought in this wonderful artist who worked on the Gongbi style of painting. Gongbi style is a Chinese style of painting, which has a very realistic look. And you will see that in the pictures that I'm showing here. The highlight of this book, The Light of the Bhagavad, is its simplicity. It's amazingly simple and clear. It's very difficult to work on a book that's this simple and clear, because you can't take notes out of something that's already pretty concise and precise. So it's been a challenge for me to work through the book. But I'm a big fan of Srila Prabhupada's Light of the Bhagavad, and I hope that after we go through the book, we will not be able to go through all of it, but if we, after we go through what we can today, if you're tempted to take a read, then it would be most pleasing. Let's see. This is the picture of Srila Prabhupada. I love the flowers in ISKCON New Gaya, which is the name of the Tokyo temple. And here we go. So Srila Prabhupada chose autumn. The reason, one of the ideas I chose this book was because we are also reaching autumn here at ISV. We are at that time where autumn is just coming in. And I really like this quote. There are some quotes that come up as we go. Most of the quotes are Srila Prabhupada's quotes. This is just something I wanted to share because it sounded so amazing. It's so strange that autumn is so beautiful, yet everything is dying. Isn't that amazing? That even death is so beautiful. We tend to think of death as a very morose and negative thing, but it really isn't. Nature has a way of making everything beautiful. And autumn is a prime example of that. So here's the first one. So I just want to let you know that these pictures, I had to painstakingly get them from the book simply because it doesn't work without the pictures. It's a very unique, special book, and I would request no copying. It's copyrighted to the PPT, so please don't copy. Please don't in any way use them anywhere. It's only meant to serve the purpose of sharing this wonderful book with the audience. Let's get started. So here we are. It's 48 verses. We're hitting first verse 1. Anywhere. It's only meant to serve the purpose of sharing this wonderful book with the audience. Let's get repeating. Yeah, it's 48 verses. Can you mute? Verse 1. I think we're lagging with the, somebody has a Facebook on, so that's why we're lagging. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back and look at this. I'm going to read this. This is the, so Prabhupada is literary genius. He's a spiritual literary genius. He picks up the 10th canto, and just like he did with the Krishna book, he writes it in his own way. So we're not seeing the literal translation of the 10th canto, 20th chapter here. We're seeing his take on it. So he's written it for us in such a way that there's a beautiful flow of a description. And with each presentation, there's a lot of points that he's highlighting in his notes in the book. So let's start. The arrival of clouds accompanied by thunder and flashes of lightning all over the sky provide a picture of life-giving hope. Covered by deep bluish clouds, the sky appears artificially dressed. The thunder and lightning within the clouds are signs of hope for a new way of life. So here, Srila Prabhupada is talking about the three modes. So first, he's talking about about this picture of life-giving hope. You know, there's a very nice statement of life-giving hope. This whole idea of lightning and thunder in the sky. The sky, Prabhupada is describing by saying, sky represents the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's open and welcoming, and it's infinitely large. And over the sky, we have these clouds. So he's talking about the idea that these deep bluish clouds that cover the sky represent our ignorance. And in this way, he introduces the concept of Tamoguna, Rajoguna, and Sattvaguna. He says, just like these clouds, these dark clouds that cover the sky, we are covered from seeing the Supreme by this mode of ignorance, which is tamas. Tamas of forgetfulness. The forgetful living entity, individually and collectively, makes sounds like thundering of clouds. They forget who they are. Having forgot who they are, they think that they are separate from the Supreme. They want to be separate from the Supreme. They want to enjoy separately from the Supreme. And then they enter the mode of Rajas. In the mode of Rajas, they make this thundering noise saying, for me, it's mine, it's ours. And in this way, they try to use the world around them for their own purposes. So he says, first we are covered, and that is tamas. Then we think ourselves independent and different from the Lord. That's Rajas. And then this lightning that strikes through the clouds is our only ray of hope. The lightning is the life-giving hope. And that is the mode of sattva or goodness. The flash of lightning is our only beam of hope. It can lead us to the path of knowledge. And therefore it is considered to be the mode of sattva. So taking this image of autumn, of rainy. So we're not in autumn yet. Remember, this is the rainy season. So Srila Prabhupada starts the book with the rainy season. And he talks about this beautiful rainy season and all the things that happen during the rainy season, all the way up to, I think, the 29th verse. And in the 29th verse, he opens to the autumn month. So he actually doesn't start with autumn at all. He talks about the living entities being a small part of the Supreme. And he says that we're not just being small little particles of the Supreme. We are not supposed to be one with the Supreme, in the sense that we're not supposed to merge with him. He brings up the concept of achintya beda beda tattva. He says, highlighting this, he says, we are simultaneously one and different. This is the philosophy Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu expounds in his Vedanta Sutras. A sincere seeker of the absolute truth is called a Vedantist. Vedas mean knowledge, and Vedanta means the ultimate conclusion of that branch, of all branches of knowledge. The ultimate conclusion is knowing Krishna. So, he first describes the whole rainy season with the understanding of who is God, how am I unable to understand him, what is my natural nature, which is, and what will save me, which is spiritual knowledge, which is in the form of lightning. In this way, he introduces the reader to the three modes while enticing him into this visual picture of a cloudy day. I like this notable quote from Srila Prabhupada. He says, the living being is only a sample of the absolute truth. Isn't that nice? You have a small little piece of something, a sample. You go into Costco and they're constantly giving you samples. And like, if you go to buy maybe furnishings, they'll give you a small little sample. You have these samples to flip through to see if you like what you're buying, right? But Prabhupada is using the word here as saying the living being is only a sample of the absolute truth. He usually likes to describe it as the sunlight, and then the rays of light coming from the sun, and the particles in those rays. But here he uses the word sample, which is very unique, and I like that a lot. The second verse he goes on is, now we've seen the rain, the thunder. The scorching heat of the sun evaporates water from the seas, rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, and there is little water anywhere. The people become thirsty and always look overhead for rain, but in despair. Yet, just at the right moment, torrents of rain begin to fall everywhere in the land, even on the hard stones, and the land becomes overflooded. So you can imagine a situation where everything's really dry and suddenly there's this huge downpour of rain. If you've lived in India, this completely makes sense. I remember growing up in India, and when there's the first rain, there's this wonderful smell of the mud, dry mud on the ground being dusted up by the first rain. It's just an amazing smell. And the clouds come in, and the first rain is always amazing. It's a very unique experience. And rains in India are known to be very heavy. So here we look at this, just at the right moment, torrents of rain begin to fall. So they're usually sudden and heavy. And here Prabhupada uses this vivid image to describe the government and the people. He says, this scorching heat of the sun is nothing but the taxes that the government collects from the people. He says, the government collects all these taxes. And in due course, after it's accumulated all this money, it gives it back to the citizens, right? It does come back. But how does it come back? It pours irrespective on everybody, and it falls like rain on stone-hearted men, says Prabhupada. It's completely misused. In a state, stone-hearted men in the state who are unable to utilize the money properly and who squander it for sense gratification. So he's talking about the concept of what kind of a government is a good government. And he says, for a government to be good, the people have to be good. Good character, says Srila Prabhupada. To have an equal distribution of state-raised taxes, the citizens need to be scrupulously honest and virtuous. Prabhupada brings it back to the basics. He says, good cultural behavior from the citizens can always bring us to good leaders. Good leaders will in turn effectively utilize taxes. And by that, we will end up with an equal and proper distribution of the same. So he says, if you have people who have very low culture, then they cannot choose the right leader. A poor leader cannot give good governance. Therefore, good character is the first principle necessary for good government and equal distribution of wealth. He says, in the ancient times, kings were taught all this. They were taught lessons in political philosophy by ideal teachers, and citizens from village to village were taught the principles of self-realization. Everybody was God conscious and they were honest in their dealings. The kings were responsible for the state. The same basic principles are accepted in the democratic governments today, but people are irresponsible. They always vote for people without a clear understanding of their ability to govern. In cosmic administration, so he's talking about the Lord. The Lord's administration has only one party, and this consists of the servants of the Lord. There is no 2-3 people fighting for power. He says the cosmic laws in terms of order of the Supreme Lord are followed and maintained everywhere in various planets. But people suffer only because of their own folly. So he says the Lord, he has a party too, but it's one party. And it's run very nicely, and they all respond to the same person because the Lord is fair and the Lord is aware. Nothing goes wrong. So then why are we suffering? He says people suffer on account of their own follies. Here he brings Bhagavad Gita, the first verse, BG 3:14, and he says, Annad bhavati bhutani parjanyat annam sambhavat yajnat bhavati parjanyo yajna karma samudbhava. All living bodies subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, and yajnas are born of prescribed duties. So he brings in the word yajna. First, he talks about what makes a good governance. The people, the quality of the people. Then he says, how can you have that kind of quality people? He says, yajna, sacrifice. Understand where everything comes from. And he quotes this. And he says, if you understand where everything comes from, you will understand that yajna karma samudbhava. You need to do yajna, and yajna comes from prescribed duties. He says, if you do your yajna, then you would be in a position to get this benefit. And then he goes on to say, the process of yajna is called the Sankirtan yajna. In this age, it is the Sankirtan yajna. I really liked his definition of Sankirtan yajna. He says, Sankirtan yajna is mass agitation for invoking man's lost spiritual consciousness. Mass agitation for invoking man's lost spiritual consciousness. That is Sankirtan yajna. The first principle necessary for good governance and equal distribution is good character. The requirement for everyone is yajna, that has to be done for you to get your basic requirements, because that is what the Lord specifies in the Gita. And then he goes on to say, obedience is the first law of discipline. People have become disobedient to the laws of God. Therefore, neither rain nor wealth is equally distributed. Neither rain nor wealth is equally distributed. A man who is ultimately disobedient cannot have any good qualifications. Disobedient leaders lead disobedient people, and the whole administration becomes polluted and full of dangers. A blind man leading several other blind men. Therefore, the state taxes should be spent to build the character of the people in general, and that will bring happiness to the citizens of the state. Where are we in the story? We're here where there's a sudden downpour of rain and there's a flooding everywhere. And Sri Prabhupada is bringing us to this core concept of how the character of man defines the character of the men define the character of the government, and defines quality of governance. Let's go to 3. He's pretty heavy. He's covering a lot of basics here, but he's following it through by this beautiful description. All these paintings are Chinese, that the specific Chinese art form, and they add to the beauty of the verses. But what we are trying to understand is his intelligent way of bringing Krishna consciousness, explaining Krishna consciousness through something that looks very mundane and very normal day to day. Attracted by electricity throughout the sky and driven by forceful winds, clouds gradually cover the surface of the earth to satisfy the needy people by supplying water, which is the sustenance of their life. Clouds bestow rain upon man as the mercy of the Lord, who is always kind to the needy living being. So here with verse 3, he's going to talk to you about how the Lord is merciful by nature. He says God is always kind. God is most kind. And he's giving a beautiful example of how God is kind. He says, God is so kind, he knows that we all need water. Water is a basic necessity. Without it, we cannot survive. So he has stored and saved water for us by filling the earth with 3/4 of the earth's surface. He covers it with water and he keeps it salty to preserve it. It's such a beautiful description. I've heard it before, and every time I hear it, I am amazed by the mercy of the Lord. He says, the Lord kept the water salty so it can be preserved. And then with the sun, he evaporates the water and brings it back as rain so it can come back to us in a purified, clean form. And by this, we see his mercy and generosity. The Lord has engaged the powerful sun to evaporate the water of planets like Earth and distill it into clear water in the clouds and stock it on the peaks of mountains as we stock water in overhead tanks for later distribution. Part of the stock of water is refrigerated into ice, so it will not flood the earth for no good purpose. The ice melts gradually throughout the year, flows down through the great rivers, and glides down to the sea again for preservation. Isn't that beautiful? Therefore, the law of God's nature is neither blind or accidental. Behind the law of nature is a living God. So he says, look at this one simple example. Do you think it just happened on its own? It just so happens that the water evaporates, so happens that it comes down, so happens that it flows. It's not true. There is a hand behind everything, and it's a kind hand that cares for you. Matter doesn't work automatically without a living hand, says Srila Prabhupada. And he brings in Bhagavad Gita 9:10 to support this. He says, Maya Adhyakshena Prakriti Suyate Sacharacharam Hetunanena Kaunteya Jagat Viparivartate. This material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So he says, there's a person behind all this. Don't expect that there's nobody and it's just randomly happening. He's very nicely saying, behind the laws of nature is the living brain of God. Nature is only a power. Behind the power is a powerhouse. Like we always reminded, energy and energetic. Behind the power is a powerhouse, and with the powerhouse, there is a brain, a thinking, working brain. So he says, the Lord is so merciful. He bestows his mercy on us. Why is he not regularly bestowing his mercy? And he has this very nice point that he brings up here. He says, God is merciful undoubtedly, but he bestows his mercy on us when we need it the most. This is so because we forget God as soon as we obtain this mercy. Is it not true? When we are in times of grave danger, dire necessity, or desperation, our prayers are the strongest. We literally drag his attention towards us. We're begging for his mercy. The moment everything becomes normal, well, we become lukewarm, to say the least, in the way we interact with him. So Prabhupada says, how do you avoid distress in this material world? Simple. Remember the mercy of the Lord at all times, and you will not be in distress. Distress comes because he wants to make sure you keep remembering him, because you keep forgetting him. And that is his logic. He chooses Bhagavad Gita 7:14 to support it. Devahiyesha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mame vaye prapadyante Mayam etam tarantite. This divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is very difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So he says, this is all a wonderful, merciful God. And if he's not giving it very regularly, it's because we aren't very grateful. If we can constantly remember him, where is the need for him to constantly remind us? Oh. So we've had this rain and everything's flowing. Now we have, after heavy rain showers, the fields and forests in all directions appear green and healthy. Thus they resemble a man who has undergone severe austerities for some material gain and has achieved his end. For such a man is strong, hearty, and good looking. So he says, look at all this greenery. The moment there's a heavy rain, everything sprouts and everything becomes fresh, lush, green. The rain is ending, and then the effect of the rain is showing now. And he says, this greenery is such a temporary thing, it will not last. Just as material loss and gain are destined for a person based on the type of body that he receives. So Prabhupada is talking about this whole idea that everything around us is temporary. This body that we receive is based on certain calculations, what we have earned, what we have deserved. And out of this 8,400,000 species of life, we get a type of body that is determined to enjoy and suffer in accordance to a particular formation. And he brings up this example. He says, a wealthy man's son, the body of a wealthy man's son will suffer different from that of a poor man's son. His type of suffering will be different. Although no one undergoes severe austerities to obtain distress, it comes upon us anyway. Similarly, happiness also comes upon us anyway. So even though we may be able to avoid distress temporarily by some method, or create, great joy for us by temporary achievements in our life, there is no way that any of this can factually bring any gain for us. Our duty is not to achieve this temporary happiness, but to aim for eternal happiness. And he says the ultimate gain is possible in this human form of life. Permanent happiness is possible when one is freed from material sources of happiness. He says the sources of happiness around us are all temporary. As long as we keep going and looking there, we will not become eligible to go for that which we really want and which we really deserve, which is permanent happiness. One should try to live in the unlimited clear sky. Remember the picture of the sky in the beginning with the clouds over it? The sky represents the Supreme. He says one should aim to live under the unlimited clear sky with a clear understanding of the Supreme. And he says, overflooded with the rays of the sun and moon. That is the kind of sky under which we should live. That is what we should desire. Life of freedom in eternity, complete knowledge and blissful atmosphere is the heart's desire of an enlightened soul. We should undertake all sorts of penance and austerities to attain that permanent source of happiness. So he's using this example to bring out the idea that we should look for permanence, not temporary. This growth of grass and sprouting and freshness after the rainy season is temporary. Similarly, our joys and sadness in our life is also temporary. We shouldn't try to hold on to that. We should look for something that's more permanent. Now he goes on to describe the evenings. What happens in the evenings in such a rainy, in the rainy season? He's bringing in descriptions. He says, the evening in the rainy season is dark all around. There is no sight of the twinkling stars on the horizon or the pleasing moon. They are covered by clouds, and the insignificant glowworms become prominent in the absence of the luminaries in the open sky. Who are the luminaries in the open sky? The moon and the stars, right? So here Prabhupada is now talking about changing. How, you had clear skies and you could see everything, but because of the rainy season, that it's always covered with clouds and things have changed. He brings in this concept that seasons cause changes. They cause changes all around the year. Similarly, there are also bigger changes that happen over time. Time periods keep changing, and these are called yugas. He says the period that is dominated mostly by goodness is called Satyuga. Then comes a period of passion, which is called Treta Yuga. Then there is a period of mixed passion and ignorance, which is Dwapar Yuga. And then finally, we get to a period of darkness and ignorance, which is Kali Yuga. Kali is defined as quarrel, or the age of quarrel. It's compared to this rainy season, where many difficulties of life are experienced due to the damp season. In Kali Yuga, there is lack of proper guidance. So he goes on to say, You can take guidance. On an open, clear sky, you can look to the sun and the moon for guidance. You can find your way. If you notice, in the olden days, people who go out into sea would use the position of the stars to find their way. But what would you do in a cloudy sky? So he says, Kali is like that. Everything's become cloudy. And who's trying to give us guidance here? He says, guidance isn't coming from the right sources. In a dark, cloudy day, he points out these glowworms you see in the picture. He says it's these glowworms that become our dull little points of guiding light. We don't have the moon, we don't have the stars, and it's very difficult for us to find our way. And he describes these glowworms as being small groups of various religious conceptions. They're trying to become prominent because of the lack of the moon, and they are trying to push their philosophies and their ideas onto the ignorant mass of people. So he says, whom is he describing as sun and moon? He's talking about the Vedas. He says the Vedas are the original source. They are the ones that will give you the right guidance. And because in this time and age, everything has been clouded and everything has become, it's no longer clear and properly defined. Anybody with a so-called concept of philosophy, so-called concept of religiosity, they come in and try to guide people, and completely, people aren't sure where they're going and what they're doing. So that's what he's describing. He pulls in the verse from Bhagavad Gita 15:15. He says the purpose of the Vedas is to know the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto matta smritir jnanam apohanam cha vedescha sarvairahameva vedyo vedanta krit vedavid eva chaham. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas am I to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. So it is from the Vedas that we should take guidance, and not from all these smaller groups, philosophical groups, and spiritual groups that do not have that kind of clear guidance. On hearing the sound of the torrential rains, the frogs. So now he's going on to the insects, the animals. First, he described the atmosphere. Remember the clouds, the thunder, the lightning. He talks about how people are parched and suddenly this rain comes pouring down. And then he goes on to describe how once the rain comes down, then the clouds start forming. And then there is this, there's a lot of mercy because water is being supplying. And from the water, the greenery starts to grow, right? And from the greenery, he starts to talk about how in the evenings, there's just these little glowworms there because it's so gloomy. The only light we get is from the glowworms. Now he starts talking about the animals that you see in the rainy season. On hearing the sound of the torrential rains, the frogs come out of the mountain caves and begin to chant, like brahmacharis who chant the Vedic hymns by the order of the spiritual master. So here, Srila Prabhupada brings out the concept of why we preach. He says that just like these frogs come out the moment it rains, sages of the world recognized religious sects. He says those who are authorized religious sects, those sages, they must come out of their secluded places and preach. They must preach the science of Lord. And in this, very interestingly, he brings up this statement. The warning is already there, and responsible leaders of religious sects must meet together and form a common platform of a league of devotees of the Lord. So there is his idea of forming a league. Remember? He tried to form it, it didn't work very well. There's this concept, Srila Prabhupada is always thinking about this. That everybody should come together and they should build that momentum to bring this change in the world. Those people in general, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and members of other sects that have convincing faith in the authority of God should not sit idle and silently watch the rapid growth of a godless civilization. This is the mercy of a Vaishnava. You can feel his aching heart when he says that. He says, how can you sit idle and allow this kind of godless civilization to grow? No matter whether you are Muslim or Christian or a Hindu, whatever you are, you must step up and help people. Sounds a lot like Prahlad Maharaj, doesn't it? And he says, even at the risk of death, he describes beautiful examples. Srila Prabhupada says, law-abiding citizens of the state never fear the police. Who will fear the police? Only somebody who's broken the law or done something wrong. Similarly, the sages who are surrendered to the Lord, these devotees of the God, are fearless. They always speak about the existence of God, even at the risk of death. because such devotees have deep compassion for the mass of people who have completely forgotten the Supreme and who are engaged in a false pursuit of happiness and ending up in sense pleasures, enjoying it like hogs and dogs. So he says it's important, it's our responsibility to preach because we have to help people. The small rivulets that almost dried up during the months of May and June now begin to overflow their banks, like upstarts that suddenly overflow the limits of expenditure. So here he's talking about simple living and serving the Supreme. He says, the sea is always within its limits, no matter how much water comes flowing in from the rivulets and everywhere else. It stays in its limits, and similarly, one should always stay within their limit in their usage of their assets. There are two types of human beings, Srila Prabhupada. There is the introspective person and the extravagant person. The extravagant person is practically asleep to introspection, says Srila Prabhupada. They are unable to derive any permanent value from the assets of the human form of body. For them, it's always about enjoying and experiencing. It's external. The introspective person is as grave as the sea. No matter how many things come in to excite him, he stays calm and quiet and learns to take full advantage of the human form of life. Those who are extravagant temporarily overflow in material enjoyment. And then after the rainy season is over, they become as dry as riverbeds. So it's all, everything affects them. Shitoshna, Sukha Dukha, everything affects them. They're constantly in the struggle of enjoying, suffering. And it's always up and down, up and down. But an introspective person can stay calm. And this is his description, like the sea. I really like this quote from Srila Prabhupada. He says, the mind dedicated to extravagance is a bad bargain. One can make the best use of the mind by introspection. It's like with the Srimad Bhagavatam. It says, your purpose is to inquire. Now that you are here, ask questions, inquire. It's a very similar point. Let's go to 8. The colorful greenery of the newly grown grass, the seasonal flowers, the frogs' umbrellas, the butterflies, and the other variegatedness of the rainy season perfectly represent a well-to-do family absorbed in vanity over their personal assets. So Srila Prabhupada is speaking up a description of the rainy season. He's making an allegorical comparison with somebody else, and then completely bringing in a new context with his explanations. He says all this colorful greenery, everything else reminds him of a well-to-do family that's enjoying all this, personal assets. And then he goes on to explain the concept by saying, having a lot of riches makes a person pretty forgetful. A rich man will display his opulence in many colorful ways. He has a good residence, a bungalow, car, well-trimmed garden, and he thinks as if all of this is for him, and he forgets where it comes from. A poor man, on the other hand, has no such problem. He's plain in behavior, and he has not forgotten. Whereas a rich man will forget that everything in this world is temporary. It comes and it goes. Material assets, Srila Prabhupada says, he describes them to be like these seasonal flowers. One day, either the flowers will wither or the gardener will leave. Knowing this, knowing that there is nothing permanent here, we should not interact so much with material nature. He gives the example of a mirage. He says in the desert, there's no water, but the foolish deer runs after illusionary water to quench his thirst. The water is not unreal, says Prabhupada, but the place where it's seeking the water is misleading. The advancement of material civilization is like a mirage in the desert. So he says, you own all these things, cars, houses, factories, land, shares, everything you own, but it's just a mirage. None of this is going to stay. And you're not staying, you're coming and going. So in that sense, what are you holding on to and what is permanent? He says, real happiness should be spiritual, permanent happiness. Happiness in matter is impossible to achieve. So water is not false, but we must not seek it in the desert. Very nice. This is water is not false. Water is not false. There, our need is not false. We're looking for it. But where we seek it is very important. And he says, happiness in matter. Looking for happiness in matter is impossible to achieve. So he very beautifully, simply brings all these concepts to a person who's completely new to Krishna consciousness, who's just walking by, looking at these pictures and these descriptions. And if they so happen to read through, they get a sense of how, material nature is pretty temporary.
And our needs are not for temporary things, but for eternal things, because that's our nature. And because we do not see what we really need to see, we're clouded in our vision and misguided in our thoughts, we're unable to find the real happiness we seek. We're unable to understand our true natures. 9. A picturesque scene of green paddy fields enlivens the heart of the poor agriculturist, but it brings gloom to the face of the capitalist who lives by exploiting the poor farmers. So when it rains and everything grows, of course the agriculturist is very happy. Has a good crop. He's going to sell it sell it for good money, and he'll have a good life. But the industrialist, that's not what he wants. Okay? Srila Prabhupada says he brings in the concept of agriculture here. He's talked about who we are, what we're doing, what is our nature. When coming to agriculture, he says, what should we be doing? He says, agriculture is the noblest profession. The Vaishya community handles 3 things. They are natural agriculturists, they protect cows, and they are general traders. These are 3 types of Vaishyas. Lord Krishna incarnated as a Vaishya. He took pleasure in being the son of a Vaishya family. Nanda Maharaj was a big protector of cows. He had 900,000 cows. He's said to have had 900,000 cows. And in the tract of land known as Vrindavan, it was almost flooded with milk and butter. God's gifted professions for mankind are agriculture and cow protection. Srila Prabhupada explains, when do we trade? We trade only when we have surplus. We don't trade on what we essentially need. And this is something that's gone a little lopsided these days. He says, trade is meant only for transporting surplus produce to places where the produce is scanty. When traders become too greedy and materialistic, they take to large-scale commerce and industry and allure the poor agriculturists to unsanitary industrial towns with the false hope of earning more money. So when there's not enough green, when there's not enough rain, and agriculture is not going very well, industrialists tend to encourage them to come. So you see a lot of the farmers are moving from the villages into the cities to work in companies, to work in factories. Srila Prabhupada was talking about that, saying, can these factories really feed you? Can they grow wheat? Can they give you milk? They can't do that. So why are you building more and more of that? Says Srila Prabhupada. He says, the industrialist and the capitalist does not want the farmer to remain at home satisfied with his agricultural produce. When the farmers have a luxuriant growth of food grains, the capitalist becomes gloomy at heart. The real fact is that humanity must depend on agriculture and sustain on agricultural produce. No one can produce rice and wheat in big iron factories. The industrialist goes to villages to purchase the food grains that he is unable to produce. See, even though he's a great industrialist, he still has to come and get his grains. And that is why the agriculturalist. So, agriculture should be most important. That's what he's trying to say. No one can produce rice and wheat in big iron factories. Such an obvious statement, something we just don't seem to understand these days. God's gifted professions for mankind are agriculture and cow protection. Now he's going to talk about rain. We saw frogs, remember? It was the first first living thing, first animal that we noticed. There'll be other animals coming along, but the first description was a frog. And now he talked about how the rain makes everything lush. And he talks about how the fields are all lush. So the agriculturist is happy. And then he talks about rain. The benefits of newly fallen water. Just as a living being attains a transcendently attractive form by rendering service to Lord Hari, similarly, all the inhabitants of the land and the water assume beautiful forms by taking advantage of the newly fallen water. So here in the rainy season, lots of fresh water from the sky has fallen. And Srila Prabhupada explains to us the value of fresh water. He says animals, fish, all of them, they benefit from this rain. He says drinking and taking bath in the fresh rainwater of the rainy season, the tired and parched animals are refreshed. Their complexions become brilliant and their health is invigorated by the arrival of new rainwater. Even the lakes, ponds, and rivers are cleansed and invigorated by the downpour of new rainwater, and thus they become more beautiful. So he gives an example similarly that a devotee of the Lord who takes advantage of the beautiful and invigorating downpour of the transcendental descriptions of the Lord can also find his spiritual consciousness invigorated and refreshed. This is just like rainwater refreshes everyone. This spiritual rain, transcendental sound, can refresh our spiritual body and consciousness. He says, for example, our students in Krishna consciousness, when they first came, they were very dirty looking, and they, although they had naturally beautiful features, because of no proper information, they appeared dirty and wretched. So he's talking about the hippies and everybody else who came, and then they transformed, he says. After taking to Krishna consciousness, their health has improved, they're following rules and regulations, and therefore their body luster has increased. And when dressed up with saffron-colored clothes and tilakas, they look as if they've come directly from Vaikuntha. He says following proper rules and regulations and having clean habits is so essential. So here's a description. He's talking to rain. I like this concept that rain always makes people happy. Not everybody, as we notice here, but usually. Rain is such a welcoming thing. In the rainy season, when the rivers swell and rush to the ocean, and as the wind blows the waves about, the ocean appears to be agitated. Similarly, if a person engaged in mystic yoga process is not very advanced in spiritual life, he can be affected by the modes of nature and thus will be agitated by the sex impulse. So now we remember he talked about the sea and how the sea is always calm. And now he comes to the ocean and says, ocean is all agitated. When the rainwater comes rushing in from the seas, ocean waves start to really swell and ebb, and it looks very messy, like the mind of a person who's in mystic yoga. He says, a mystic yogi is not very advanced, he says. And because he's not very advanced, he will have a difficult time. He says, just as the ocean is agitated by the blowing of wind that happens every rainy season, the yogi will also be attracted by the allurement of material nature in the form of beautiful women and sex pleasure enjoyed in their association. This is a sign of immaturity in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge. Now, how do we overcome that? He says, fixing one's mind on the lotus feet of a bona fide spiritual master, who is a representative of God, can fix us so that we would not be carried away by such agitation. So, having firm determination to stay connected and fixed to lotus feet of your Guru Maharaj is your way to overcome all this type of agitation. Mountains. So he talked about the oceans, now he's come to the mountains. The mountains, although being struck by torrents of rain, see in the picture, everything's leaning down because it's rain lashing down at them. The mountains, although being struck by torrents of rain during the rainy season, are not shaken, just as those whose hearts are dedicated to the transcendental personality of Godhead are never disturbed, even when harassed by great misfortune. He's talking about the advanced devotee. He's describing dedicated devotees as to be as strong as mountains. He says they will accept any adverse condition of life as the mercy of the Lord. Without becoming disturbed, an advanced soul patiently awaits for the mercy of the Supreme, which he knows is coming. So he will never get agitated, even when he's struck down by powerful torrents of rain, like in the rainy season. Devotees remain humble in spiritual enlightenment, free from pride, and easily gain the mercy of the Lord. So he's talking about the qualities, how the qualities of the devotee endear him to the Lord. In the rainy season, some of the roads are not frequently used and become covered with long grasses, and thus it becomes very difficult to see the road. Similarly, in this age, the transcendental scriptures are not properly studied by the Brahmanas. Being covered by the effects of time, the scriptures are practically lost. It becomes very difficult to understand or follow them. So here he says, if we don't follow rules and regulations and processes, we will lose our way. He says, a covered road is exactly like a Brahmana who's not accustomed to studying and practicing the reformatory practices of Vedic injunctions. He becomes covered with the long grasses of illusion. Illusion can overcome a person who does not follow the process. By being deviated, this seasonal overgrowth of long grasses are like Maya, to which a person succumbs, and then he starts to identify himself with the illusionary products of nature, thereby losing his way. He succumbs to the illusion, forgetting his spiritual life. You lose your way because you can't see the path anymore, because Maya has blinded you. Sadhana and tapasya, the ability to stay on track, follow your spiritual practices every day, and take on a little bit of austerity can certainly help us keep this road clean and working. Srila Prabhupada now goes on back to the sky. He's talked about, starts with the sky, he goes down to the earth, how the people on the earth are affected, how the plants are affected, how the animals are affected. It's back into the sky, he says. The lightning becomes unsteady in its friendship, failing to remain faithfully in any one of the clouds. Although they are the friends of the entire world, just as lusty women do not remain steady, even in the company of men who possess excellent qualities. So here Srila Prabhupada describes this movement of lightning. You see thunder and lightning coming from different places, from different parts, different clouds. He says, a man and a woman in relationship, marriage relationship, should stay faithful and committed to each other. They should be steady. A cloud is compared to a qualified person here because it pours rain and gives sustenance to many people. A man who is qualified similarly gives sustenance to many living creatures, such as family members or many workers in a business. Unfortunately, if his whole life is disturbed by a wife who divorces him, everybody will suffer. When a husband is disturbed, the family is ruined, the children are dispersed, or the business is closed. Everyone is affected. It is therefore recommended that a woman desiring to advance in Krishna consciousness peacefully live with a husband and that the couple should not separate under any condition. Controlling their sex indulgence and concentrating their mind on Krishna consciousness, their lives may be successful. So he's explaining that putting Krishna in the center and having our service in the forefront, it will be very, very much more easier for a couple to stay together and work towards a common goal. In the midst of the thunder, so here we talked about the sky, and then he talks about a rainbow, the rainbow in the sky. So in the midst of the thunder in the cloudy sky, there appears a rainbow that has no string. Its appearance is compared to the appearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his servants in the midst of the material atmosphere. So he's describing all these things, describing all the sky. He talked about the clouds. He talked about the lightning in the modes. Then he talks about how lightning jumps from cloud to cloud. And that is not how it should be. Couples should stay committed to each other. And he talks about this movement of after the rain, the clouds move, you see a rainbow. And he says this rainbow represents the Supreme Personality of Godhead. See, a rainbow in the sky looks like a bow, an upturned bow, but it has no string. So Srila Prabhupada explains beautifully that the word guna means quality or mode, as well as the word string or rope. So there are two different meanings. Quality or mode, three gunas, right? It's also called as a string or rope. And he says the Lord is like this rainbow. It's a bow which is not strung. And why is it? He says, transcendence is free from the qualities of material nature. Thus, it represents a bow that has no string. The three qualities of nature, gunas do not affect the Supreme. That's what Srila Prabhupada is saying. He's explaining the quality of the Supreme here. He says, the Supreme Lord is never affected by the modes of material nature. When he appears before us in the midst of material interactions, he always remains unaffected. So he's explaining the quality of the Supreme Lord. He says, by his inconceivable energy, Supreme Lord can, 1, appear and disappear, just like the rainbow. 2, he can come and go without being affected by the roaring thunder and the clouds in the sky. None of this affect him. And 3, he is not affected by any of the three modes. So the Lord is eternally the biggest and smallest of all living entities. The living beings are his parts and parcels. They are the smallest of the small, and he's the biggest of the big. Such is the Lord. See? At night, by the grace of the moonlight, the clouds in the sky can seem to be moving. So have you seen how in the night you have the clouds and a full moon night? It looks as if the moon is moving behind the clouds. It's just an illusion. Yet the moon itself also appears to be moving, just as a living being appears to be moving because of false identification with matter. So he takes this example of cloudy sky with the moon in the backdrop, and the whole picture looks as if the moon is moving in the sky. And he says, this is false identification. So he's talking about the soul and the body. He says, at night in the rainy season, the moving clouds reflect the moonlight and make the moon appear to be moving, and this is an illusion. Thus, the covered, conditioned soul identifies with the material body and becomes subject to the sense of false ego. False ego obliges the living person to consider his material body as himself. So let's look at the points. He says, first, conditioned soul is covered. Because he's covered, he's subjected to a sense of false ego. Aham go, right? And then after the false ego, what happens? The effect of the false ego is that he identifies with his body and the children, that offspring that come from his body, and the place that he's born. They all become mine, mine, and they all become connected to this body. He has nothing to do with the body, just as the moon has nothing to do with these clouds. But in this illusion, he starts to think he is the body. The spiritual living force is always active by nature. By illusion, his activities are wrongly directed in relation to the body. He says, spiritual living force is always active by nature. It's never quiet or inactive. Liberation does not mean stopping activities. It means being purified of illusionary activities. So as he explained here, we live in illusion. We connect ourselves to something we don't belong. And because of that, we need to be liberated. The moment we purify all this illusion and get a clarity, we become liberated and we can stop these activities and go on to doing the right kind of activities. We never stop being active. 17. When the cloud appears, this is the second animal. When a cloud appears in the sky, the peacock begins to dance in ecstasy as a sincere soul becomes overwhelmed with joy at the appearance of a saint at his house. So he says, when sannyasis and preachers and acharyas come home, when they come, what should be our attitude? So he says, when these wonderful people come home, what should be the way we greet them? And he says the duty of sages and saints is to go from door to door to enlighten the householders. Householder light, he will say it again and again, is compared to a deep, dark well. And the enlightened householder therefore takes pleasure to see the appearance of sages and saints. Their appearance is like these dark, bluish, black clouds in the sky. And just as a peacock is super happy to see those clouds and he starts dancing in ecstasy, so does a householder who sees these saints and sages come, because now he knows that he will receive the mercy of those rains. Just as the peacock knows that the rain is going to quench the thirst of the parched ground, these sages, self-realized saints and sages, they take risks for the spiritual enlightenment of people in general. They could stay silent, they could take vows of silence, but that's not what they do. He says that's just cheap glory for the ignorant masses. God is satisfied only when his devotees take risks to propagate his glories. Devotees are unafraid of the difficulty of the journey. They are anxious for the welfare of fallen souls, so they come out of their way to help them remember their forgotten eternal relationship. It's the duty of the sages to enlighten, and reciprocally, the duty of the householder to receive them cordially. Just as a peacock dances in the presence of clouds, the householder realizes that the fire of the threefold miseries can be extinguished when the rain of mercy from these souls comes upon him. So that is how we approach somebody who comes to give us the mercy. Now he goes on to describe the plants. He says, many plants and creepers that were almost dead during the months of April and May are now visible again in various forms, for they are nourished by their roots in the moist earth. These numberless plants and creepers resemble persons who dry up in severe penance for some material gain, but then achieve their objectives and become luxuriously fat, nourished by sense of enjoyment. So this is cosmic creation. He says, looking at these creepers that are almost dead and down and completely collapsed, suddenly they're up and fresh and plumpy and chubby. And he's like, how is it happening? He says, this is just manifestation and non-manifestation. He says, Brahma's night, the creation is, daytime of Brahma is over, the manifested creations vanish. And at the end of Brahma's night, the creations manifest again. This cosmic creation, in its manifestation and non-manifestation, is best described by these creepers and plants. He uses Bhagavad Gita 8:19. He says, Bhutagram sa evayam, Bhutagrama sa evayam, Bhutva Bhutva praliyate, Ratre agame vasha partha, Prabhava aharagame. So he says again and again, when Brahma's day arrives, all living entities come into being. With the arrival of Brahma's night, they are helplessly annihilated. He says, even when you can't see them, the seeds remain dormant in the ground, so that when the next time the rains come, they can open up and grow, right? Similarly, the living souls, they are also kept silently within the womb of material nature. Cosmic manifestation reappears. All the silent living beings within the womb of material nature come out and engage in sense enjoyment and become luxurious and fat. So he says this is a constant cycle. And if you try to stay in this cycle, you're going to go through it again and again. A living being cannot snuff out desires. To artificially erase a desire is more dangerous than the active desire itself. All desires should be reformed. So this comes under the concept of developing a higher taste. He says cosmic creation by its nature is going to come and go, come and go. You don't want to be stuck in this constant rut forever. You want to develop a better taste, a higher taste. And to develop that taste, you should be able to reform yourself by directing your energy and activity towards spiritual activities. Otherwise, the same desires will repeatedly manifest in different varieties, and you will keep enjoying and living perpetually in material bondage. He describes the crane. So we saw the frog. Do we see anything else? Not sure. Then we come to the crane. So the crane is another nice example that Srila Prabhupada pulls up. He says a crane standing on the edge of a pond that is always disturbed by flowing water. So a crane is standing there on one foot at the end of a pond, and there's water flowing by. There's mud and stones. And that doesn't disturb him. He still keeps standing there. The crane is like a householder who is disturbed in the shelter of his home, but who, because of too much attachment, does not want to change his position. So he says this is a symptom of an uncultured life. He says the forgetful householder life, which is like a black, deep, dark well, he should not get so attached to this life. He says the householder who has too much attachment for hearth and home is never able to become a self-realized soul. He says it's not recommended. Therefore, human life was originally divided. So he's talking about the varnas and ashramas. He said it is never recommended that you stay like this, like a crane in the water forever. Varnas and ashramas define what you should be and how long you should stay in a certain stage. Human life should methodically be divided into 4. The first ashrama is the brahmacharya ashrama, or the order of life in childhood. Then you must be trained during that time to understand the ultimate goal of life. The next is the grihastha ashrama, where you are trained to enter into transcendence. Then the vanaprastha, which is the preliminary stage of renounced life. And then the sannyasa, which is the renounced stage of life. In this way, there's a gradual process of spiritual activities for the supreme ultimate goal of liberation. Unfortunately, today's culture does not encourage this. No one wants to give up householder life, even though it's full of pinpricks and mud. Those who are too attached are like these cranes who stand in the water, suffering the inconvenience, unwilling to move. We should always remember that the society, friendship, and love we are supposed to enjoy in family life are only shadowy representations of the real society, friendship, and love reciprocated in the kingdom of God. There is no reality in the conditioned life of material existence. He brings up the word mirage again. He says our ignorance creates these mirages and we become attached to them. The idea of society, friendship, and love is not false. Remember, he said water is not false. He repeats the concepts in different ways. He said, but the place we are searching for them is false. We have to give up this false position and rise to reality. That is the aim. Unfortunately, society does not encourage this. It is said that a man should give up the order of householder life at 50. But in this era of ignorance, even an old man wants to rejuvenate his bodily functions, put on artificial teeth, and make a pretense of youthful life, even on the verge of death. Crane-like politicians, especially, are too much attached to the false prestige of position and rank. So they always seek re-election, even at the fag end of life. These are symptoms of uncultured life. These are all examples of how we live uncultured. Instead of slowly progressing through the ashramas to develop a proper mindset and a behavior, we are instead just indulging our senses and suffering. He talks about how the rain affects the paddy fields in this. He says, fierce torrents of rain break over the strands and the partition walls of the paddy field. These disturbances resemble those created by seasonal opponents of standard principles of the Vedas, who are influenced by the age of Kali. So the distortion of sacred texts is what Srila Prabhupada is covering here. He says the Vedas are the ultimate. From those 4 Vedas came out the 18 Puranas. From the 18 Puranas, we also ended up with the Mahabharata and the Vedanta Sutras, variety of Vedanta Sutras. The purpose of all these Vedic literatures is to realize oneself and to be spiritual. To be a spiritual being eternally related with the Supreme. But because of the age of Kali, all this Vedic literature has been systematically distorted. They're not clean and pure anymore. These ideas have all been messed with. And he says atheistic philosophers are only concerned with eating, drinking, being merry, and enjoying. Such persons are intimately attached to sense pleasures and gross materialism. He says there are 3 different versions that they propound, such people. You see, some of them say life is meant to be annihilated. Only energy, everything, the law of the conservation of energy. It's only energy. All said and done, everything's energy, and you only end up as energy. That's one thought process. The other says, if I can see it, then it's true. They will not go or believe beyond anything that they can experience. And the third says, spirit is matter, matter is spirit, it's all the same. It declares the distinction between matter and spirit as illusionary. So there are 3 types of people who are propounding these theories. And he says there's no doubt that the Vedas are the most recognized books of knowledge. But because of all these people, our understanding has been completely distorted. The path of Vedas that does not talk about eternal relationship with the Lord, attainment of devotional service, and culminates in transcendental love is not acceptable. The wind carries the clouds to different parts of the globe, and the clouds distribute rains to satisfy the people in general, just as rich kings and merchants distribute their accumulated wealth inspired by religious peace. So here, Srila Prabhupada says, the intelligent people are not expected to earn wealth. He's differentiating again by the 4 varnas. First, he did the varnas in the beginning, explained the breakups, then he brought ashrama here in the previous verse. And now he's bringing back the varnas. He says, there's 4 divisions of society: the intelligent class, the Brahmanas, the ruling class, the Kshatriyas, the mercantile class, the Vaishyas, and the Sudras, which is the labor class. They're all meant to work together in cooperation to help achieve self-realization or cultivation of the human spirit. He says Brahmanas are the intelligent category. They are supposed to guide the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas. Brahmanas are not expected to go out and earn the wealth. Their job is to guide the people who have the wealth, who have the power, to apply it in the right way. As soon as the cooperation between these 4 classes of men stop, the basic principle of spiritual culture is lost. He says intelligent men influence the richer communities. To do what? To sacrifice for spiritual culture. They themselves should not become Kshatriyas or Vaishyas. Simply guiding them in spiritual cultivation is enough. He says, just like the wind carries the clouds to these places and the clouds distribute the rain, the intelligent person should guide the wealthy to go and do their service. He says a society with no taste for spiritual culture is a blazing fire. People who work as spiritual masters pour water on the blazing fires by 1, giving everybody, disseminating spiritual knowledge, and 2, inspiring the richer sections of society to help in this cause. 2 things they do. So he says temples of worship, for example, very interesting thing he says, temples of worship, for example, are constructed by the rich, and these temples are meant to impart spiritual education to the general public. The periodic spiritual ceremonies are held for inspiration, not for exploitation. If there are flaws now because of the age of Kali, they should be rectified, but the institutions must be saved. This is even though the usage of these yajnas and everything has become more like exploitation, we should not lose the temples, because temples are centers of learning. Spiritual knowledge is disseminated through these places. So we must rectify what's wrong. We shouldn't stop following the culture. Finally, he comes to a description of the forest with Krishna. So till this point, he's been describing everything outside. He's been describing the clouds, the sky, the thunderbolts, the rain. He's been describing the mountains, the waterways, the oceans, the seas. He's described the frogs, the cranes. He's described all the different variegated beauties of the rainy season, like the flowers, the frogs, umbrellas, the butterflies. He covers the grasses that grow. He talks about how grass grows up and covers all the walkways. Everything gets covered during the rainy season. He's described everything. Now he gets to Krishna. So up to 21, he's doing a general description, that far. And we're still in the rainy season. We haven't even come to autumn, as you can see. So from 22 starts the description with Krishna in it. And he starts by saying, after the complete rainy season, the forest of Vrindavan is full of fruits like dates and blackberries, ripening on the trees and bushes. Lord Shri Krishna, along with his elder brother Shri Baladev and other cowherd boys of the vicinity, enter the beautiful forest, accompanied by the cows, to display transcendental pastimes with his eternal friends. So here he's talking about, so here the description is about the trees, how they have these beautiful fruits, they're hanging from them. And he first starts out by explaining the advent of Krishna. He says, Lord Shri Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, he comes with his entourage once in 4,320,000,000 years, and he displays his transcendental paraphernalia just to attract the conditioned souls. He says, comes once in such a huge gap of time, and he comes just to help us. Although the material world is only a shadow of the spiritual world, the materially encaged living entity seeks spiritual happiness in the form perverted by material attachment. So he is looking for spiritual happiness in material nature. Empirical philosophers with poor fund of knowledge imagine a spiritual picture that is impersonal. So he's saying, we here are lost. We're looking for spiritual happiness in the material nature. We're not able to find it. And then there are these imperialistic people who come up to us and say, oh, everything is Brahman, it's all void, it's all impersonal form. We are unable to be attracted to that impersonal form, says Srila Prabhupada. And in turn, we see that the material forms, because it has form, material is more attractive than the concept of a spiritual, impersonal, formless thing. So we tend to lean towards this material attachment. The Lord comes to give us a form to which we can attach ourselves. Isn't that very interesting? Srila Prabhupada explains it like this. The absolute personality of Godhead, out of his limitless, causeless mercy, descends. He personally descends. And people seeking to advance spiritual emancipation, they may make a home at Vrindavan and become serious students of the six Goswamis. So he says, where should you go? If you want to learn more about this? He says, you should go to Vrindavan and learn from the six Goswamis, learn their texts. He says, Lord Shri Krishna appeared at Vrindavan 5,000 years ago. But all the relics of his appearance were lost. Then he came back as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and he helped us find all this. So he excavated the holy places and instructed the six Goswamis to give us appropriate literature so we can find out more. So he says, if you want to know more, you need to take advantage of this literature and take advantage of the dham. That is what he's trying to explain. The cows that followed the Lord within the forest moved slowly because of their heavy milk-laden udders. So from now, the description is about the Vrindavan forest. And it goes on like that all the way till 29. So we will not be able to complete because the book goes all the way to 48 verses. And up to the 29th verse, we have this beautiful description of the rainy season. And after the 29th verse enters autumn. So till 29, we have nothing but rainy season. We haven't even touched autumn yet. So from the 30th verse to the 48th verse will be autumn. So this is how the book is going. Beautiful descriptions that go through. And with each description, Srila Prabhupada is explaining another concept. It's amazing how only an Acharya can do it. He can pick up something like this and create so many allegories and connect them all so that a reader who's reading through a continuous flow of these points and conversations gets an overall understanding of the process of Krishna consciousness, the purpose of Krishna consciousness, the process of Krishna consciousness, and the most effective way to imbibe it. He's handing it all out in a small little bag, or in a small little book. This book is flooded with pictures because each verse has a picture attached to it, and that makes it very attractive to people who are artistic by nature, who are image connected by nature. Another reason this book is very useful is because it has very little Shastra content. Prabhupada rarely uses any Shastra, hardly a handful of verses, and his explanations are really simple. It was something I was for a while I was thinking about, and I was telling my own Guru Maharaj that it's just amazing how you make everything so simple. And I was telling him that, Maharaj, to make things simple should be easy, right? And then after a long time, I realized that you have to be really well read to make something this heavy, this simple. Only an Acharya can simplify something that is so complicated and detailed and make it so easy that anybody can absorb it. That is one of the things they do. Gurus, Acharyas, that's what they're most good at. Make the content suitable to the reader without losing the content. So here we are on 23, and here's a description of cows. Here's the third one. The cows are here. So we did the frog, with the crane, we're on to the cow. I hope I didn't miss any other animal. Okay, so he's talking about the cows, and the cows, he's saying their udders are so full of milk, and when Krishna calls them, they come with so much love. And this description is talking about how all of the paraphernalia around Krishna are expansions of Krishna himself. So he's giving himself pleasure. So when he calls the cow, it's overwhelmed with affection, just like a mother's breast overflows with milk when a child cries. The cow is extremely happy to be called by Krishna. So in its desire to come and serve, its udder is leaking milk. So he says, we are all covered by ignorance. Again, the clouds, covered by material ignorance. We must receive the message of the Lord to purify our hearts. Thus, knowing our true perspective, a natural affection, just like the cows are showing for Krishna, our natural affection for the Lord will also be unclogged from the clog of Maya. He says it's like a pipe that's been clogged with Maya. The moment we unclog the pipe, our natural affection for God will flow. Maya has no substantial existence, but as long as its hallucinations go on, their reactions are felt. It's very nicely said. Maya has no real substantial existence. It really cannot really do anything to you. As long as you believe in it, as long as the hallucination goes on, the effects will exist. So you have to stop hallucinating. That is the most important thing. The last one I'm going to cover today is 24. When the Lord entered the forest of Vrindavan, all the inhabitants of the forest, both animate and inanimate, were eager to receive it. He saw that the flowers of the forest, all fully blossoming, were weeping in ecstasy, honey flowing down their petals. The waterfalls on the hilly rocks were gladly flowing, and one could hear sweet sounds from the caves nearby. So here he's expressing, again, like the cows expressed affection for the Lord, and he's explaining how we will also find our natural affection if we can overcome the illusion in which we live. Then he says, look at all these things. He says, just like from where we are, whatever bhav or mode we are in, we will find our way to express our natural affection. He says spiritual energy is superior because without contact with spiritual energy, the material energy alone cannot produce anything. To convert spirit into matter and matter into spirit is so simple for the Lord. There is no difference for him between matter and spirit, and that is why he is called Kaivalya. Lord Krishna's transcendental pastimes are such that he reciprocates with spirit and not with matter. So Krishna is not reciprocating with matter, he's only reciprocating with the spirit inside. Just as an electrician knows how to take work from electricity, so with the help of electricity, he can turn water hot or cold. Like that, the personality of Godhead can turn matter into spirit and spirit into matter. That is his inconceivable power. Everything is therefore matter and spirit by the grace of Almighty. Although there is a difference between matter and spirit, for ordinary beings like us, doesn't apply to the Lord. Flowers, waterfalls, trees, fruits, hills, caves, birds, beasts, human beings are nothing but combinations of God's energy. Therefore, when the Lord appeared before them, they all become spiritually inclined because the spirit in them is reacting to the Lord. There's a spirit reacting to spirit. And so even though it looks like they can't, they react from whatever level they're at. At different stages of spiritual development, the spiritual sparks are covered by material energy in different proportions. And then gradually they become spiritualized in various species. The human form of life is the best, he says. Because we have this human form of life, it represents the complete development of the senses to be used for spiritual realization. So our most important thing is to use it and therefore develop it so we can also express our affection just as all of them are expressing theirs. That is what he's trying to say. There's more description that goes on, and then he starts talking about autumn. So this is how the book goes. We are at end of time for this class, but I hope that having listened to this flow, you will have a sense of, I wanted one to show you how amazing Srila Prabhupada is. This literary work that he's written is meant for audiences who have no background in Krishna consciousness, who have no understanding of spiritual literature, and yet at the end of reading this,
they will have a profound understanding of the basic philosophy that the Bhagavad Gita is trying to teach. Further on, he explains concepts like the concept of serving prasadam, the concept of being, the concepts that relate to cow protection, why we protect cows. He talks about the inhabitants of the forests, and he talks about concepts like material and spiritual, how they are different. So he keeps repeating points, but at the same time, he keeps adding new ideas so that he builds on his base building blocks. It's a beautiful book. I do recommend everybody try it. Let me just bring you to, let me move forward to the last one here, because I wanted to end today. Thus ends the first part of the Light of the Bhagavat, as written and presented by His Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada for the upliftment and benefit of society at large. We offer our humble obeisances to this wonderful Acharya and pray to imbibe this mood in all our teaching and preaching efforts. So this is a beautiful book that I'm sharing with everybody today. If you wish to copy or reproduce any images or texts, please contact Bhaktivedanta Book Trust for their permission, because all of this which I've shared with you today has copyright on it. If you wish to read this book in detail, we have a copy at our center at ISKCON Silicon Valley. And if you would like to get them, they're available online or any leading bookstore. So do procure the book and read it and try it for yourself. I found this book very illuminating. One, because it's great for Western preaching. Two, because it's great for kids. It introduces children to the concept of allegory. Allegory is a way of connecting a certain storyline to a certain. It uses a story to explain a concept, and it's really nice because Srimad Bhagavatam uses it a lot, and to see it here being used by Srila Prabhupada, he makes it much simpler, and at the same time, all the concepts that Srila Prabhupada is teaching are made in tune for beginners. So it's really useful for the kids, especially for preaching, because I find the points that he's put here are slightly different from the way they're put in the Bhagavad Gita or they're put elsewhere. So it's certainly a book worth visiting and reading. I hope you enjoy it. And I do have another part 2. In case you're interested, let me know. Give me feedback. And if you want part 2, then we can finish the book. Or otherwise, we leave it for you to take it forward. It's good to have more questions than answers when you leave. So maybe you'll be interested to see what else Srila Prabhupada has to say. So does anyone have any questions? Let me stop the share here. Anyone have any questions or anything? Okay. If we don't, then we will stop right here. It's been a pleasure introducing this book to the readers. I hope you all will try this out and find the light of the Bhagavat for yourself.
Thank you, Mataji. Thank you for the enlightening class. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpatarvasya kripa sindhubheva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavabhyo namo namah. Ananta Koti Vaishnavindi ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Her Grace Manjula Kantha Mataji ki jai. Thank you, Mataji.